Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Tell Me Everything. I am your host, Danielle Spinelli. I have Steve from HaulPay coming on with us. He's the founder and president of HaulPay. I've always been impressed with HaulPays and their ability to detect fraud. Like, they have seen things and shown me things that nobody else has. They really take it to the next level. So wanted to kind of give them some spotlight. I did that previously on a Fraud Girl episode. If you have not checked that out, I highly recommend, especially for your accounting team. It's huge on knowing what to look for and things like that. But Steve's been in the logistics industry for a long time, started off at CH, actually created ComFreight, and then also kind of went from there into, what is now HaulPay. So very cool. It's interesting because he was talking about how he was racing engines, and I think he's the Paul Walker of logistics. Fast and Furious. I think this will be a fun play on what I design on this episode for marketing purposes. But anyways, so yeah, let's jump into it with Steve. Get to know him. Check out HaulPay. They're really great. They have a great team, a lot of hands-on stuff. So we'll even talk about that on here, where AIs can be important and automation is important, but having that human touch, especially when it comes to fraud detection, is just, you can't take out the human, eye out of it. There's something about us humans that are just so awesome. All right, well, let's jump at it.
Tell me everything.
Tell me everything.
Well, thanks for joining me on this episode of Tell Me Everything. Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell a little bit about who you are and how awesome you are and all those things.
Great. Yeah, my name's Steve Kochan. I'm the founder and president of HaulPay, and basically started my freight career, back in 2008 now at C.H. Robinson. Worked for a bunch of smaller freight brokerages and consulted some smaller forwarders here in Southern California. And then eventually started a load board called ComFreight that I'd eventually pivot into what would become HaulPay. So have a lot of experience building freight tech, from going as far back as advising some shippers and brokers in LA in like 2011, like right after my stay at CH and another brokerage, to 2013 to 2015-ish, building one of the first kind of freight bidding boards for commercial trucks. And then moving on to the fintech stuff. So carrier factoring, broker factoring, payments. Now we're doing a lot more stuff with payments and finance and risk for our clients. So general freight nerd is probably the best way to frame me, and a lot of experience from not just being a brokerage or being a broker, having worked at small brokerages, having been at a big one, obviously one of the biggest, and then building software mostly for the mid-market, for folks that are probably your viewers.
Yeah, that's cool. It's funny because C.H. Robinson, I feel like, has come out with so many great people that have just changed the whole industry. So how did you get into freight, period? Like, was that your first job, or how did that whole thing get started?
That's a great question. Yeah. So it wasn't my first job, but it was my first corporate business job. I would work at like student union jobs at, undergrad. And actually my first business was actually even before Robinson. It was mostly like weekends. I'd seen cars, like people like go racetracks and
really?
warrior stuff. So I actually I was also a big hobbyist. I used to build like old Nissans and take them out to like track days and stuff and race them. And
like Tokyo Drift.
everyone always thinks that. Wasn't a drifter, more like actual like grip road racing, but hey, I'll take it.
So
right?
You're like Paul Walker, that whole crew.
I'm the guy in the first Fast and Furious with the Jetta who's like trying to hack the computer on the car, like because that's where I ended up doing. I ended up basically like charging by the hour to tune the engine management on these cars for people. But most of it was sanctioned like track days and racing events that they took the cars out to. So that was actually my first business, technically.
How did you get into race? Did you grow up racing? Like your family like got you into it, or you just been really big into cars, or how did that even happen?
I was, it's a long story. I almost went to the Air Force. I've been always like an aerospace and like mechanical nerd, so to speak, even just growing up. So it was kind of an outlet for me when I decided I wasn't going to go into the Air Force and be a pilot. So I think it was just more of an outlet. Like I could build it. It could go fast. I could get that outlet of engineering. And So maybe that's kind of interesting. That's where I think a lot of my engineering curiosity and stuff came from, was I just started doing it. Wasn't formally trained in it, but that was kind of one of my first businesses. And then, yeah, CH Robinson was my first corporate job, first real job after my undergrad. And that was an interesting time to join the industry, especially given the recession and the greater economy. It was very interesting. I feel like the freight market's been through rougher times in the last 3 or 4 years, even than back in '08. It's pretty crazy, but it was an interesting time to join the industry and kind of get thrown right into the thick of it.
And what year was that?
2008.
2008. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Like I think it was like May, beginning of May 2008. I went out to Eden Prairie, got trained up, and then sent me back to a branch actually in Long Beach, which is pretty close to where I still live today. So very interesting stuff. The branch I was at actually was a branch that got acquired. It was a different type of company. It was like an air freight forwarder. They got acquired by Robinson. So I also got to meet a lot of the executive team that I probably wouldn't have otherwise met if I was just at another branch that had been around for a while. So it was a good experience.
That's really cool. Yeah, I think the ones that really make it in CH, they've gone to do great things. And then I came from a small brokerage myself, so I think there's a little niche in that as well. I like every time I go somewhere, people are like, "Well, what brokerage did you work at?" I'm like, "Oh, it's just a small one. Like, there's no way you've ever heard of it ever." But I think that almost gives you a little bit more grit in things. Do you kind of feel the same way?
Yeah, I agree. And actually, that was the very next job I had after CH Robinson, was working for a 4 or 5 person. I think our largest were 6 people. With a few agents, freight forwarder / brokerage, basically with a small, specific set of really special customers, LTL, truckload, a lot of domestic stuff, but also a lot of freight forwarding on the other side of things. So seeing that contrast was a big part of the story, I think, for me, where I got interested in, because I'd been kind of used to working on these kind of weekend warrior cars and their software for their cars, and kind of seeing like that's the gritty part, right? It's like these guys aren't big racing teams, right? So I had an appreciation for like the smaller business mindset or enterprising mindset. So when I started to think about what could I do to build like software, solve some of the problems I had to deal with that I couldn't just solve by going into one of these big full-fledged TMS systems like CH Robinson had kind of built time. That kind of was a big part of the inspiration for what would later become HaulPay too.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. So like the grit of being in such a small broker, like you do so many different roles, you wear so many different hats, you're not in just one spot. And so you do see a lot of inefficiencies where you're like, this could be better like this, or because I'm in the trenches and dealing with this, I handle my workflow a little bit differently, where I know I need to be a little bit more stringent on this. And like, the fraud, for instance, like, we can jump into that here in a little bit, but that, for instance, to me, it's like you have one bad situation in a small company, like that can take out your customer, like take out your business. Like it's so impactful. People that are in these large businesses, you don't understand how much it affects you. So that's interesting. So the inefficiencies, I guess, that you saw, and like how you were like, okay, we need this next step in software. What were you mainly seeing on the front lines and in the trenches that brought you to the first part? You said ComFreight. Was that
ComFreight? Yeah, that was the first company I started with. The first focus was more on like freight matching and bidding, really. So like that was one of the first problems. I was like, I kind of want to solve this for myself. Was I could post a load out to the Robinson network of like, I think the headcount was even bigger. It's close to the same. It kind of receded a little bit. It was there's like 12,000 people in the company at that point. I can't remember how many branches in every major city. So it's like, hey, I need to cover a load. Okay, well, okay, I covered the load. That's it. I'll share a little bit of revenue with that other branch, but all right, we're done for the day. So, and then moving over to a much smaller kind of freight brokerage startup, if you want to call it that. Obviously we didn't have that, right? So it was a little bit of shock. I had to figure out how many load boards can I stack? How fast can I post to these load boards? Which ones are better at certain times of day? Then I got to negotiate the rate. So it's just a whole process that was a lot more involved. It was time consuming and expensive. that I thought, all right, well, this just seems like an obvious area. And then just discovering like what the rate's going to be, the price discovery part of that process. So as now we have all kinds of cool stuff, other platforms that do this really well in the market that help with this stuff. But back then there really was just like, there's like get loaded load board. I'm probably dating myself. Like uh, DAT was kind of okay, but it wasn't like I think DAT bought get loaded. So they kind of like, you had, I think truck stop was still there, but again, it was even more flatbed back then. So it was just like cobbling together all these different little apps and websites to try to get like a load booked was really painful. And then who are you actually booking the freight with? How do you verify that they're actually who they say are, who they say they are? I think at that point in time, there was no way to validate that we were actually paying a legit carrier. It was just like, send me. The nice thing is they usually take a check, or the factor would take a check. That was almost safer because I think at that point the FMCSA was just starting to get like websites where you could search, the mailing address and stuff like that. So, but still a little sketchy, especially you scale that type of business and that type of operation, you're definitely going to have exploits and negative things will happen. So that was definitely some of the inspiration was like, let's do this like freight bidding load board. And kind of start with that because that was the problem that I was having in a lot of other smaller brokerages. And I had other friends who went off to smaller companies too that were kind of dealing with the same challenges.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because I think like I remember whenever I would needed a rate, and we never used. Even now, I don't think my brokerage I was working for it uses any type of rating tool because really for them it's like their own private data too, and they want to keep their rates not out in the open. And so we would just have to either like post a fake load, which I know that's like super frowned upon now, but post a fake load, get rates, take it down. Oh, sorry, load's covered or whatever you would say. I know now that's like so frowned upon. People like carriers hate it whenever brokers do that, but that's part of how you get
I'm
rates.
sure I did. I'm sure I did that at some point
Yes.
back in the day. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's sometimes there's no other way to get to that discovery point. So yeah, the goal originally with the initial ComFreight project was just like, hey, can I make this more of a bidding process where you can get rates? And I don't think I knew what I had. Like
Yeah.
I had like some major ag companies using it, and I was just like, oh, this is cool. Like,
Yeah.
I probably could have spun that off and raised money just around that business, but just wasn't really registering for me until a few years later. And at that point, Convoy had come out, Cargomatic was out. There was starting to get a lot of money flooding into it. Like, all right, well, I kind of missed the boat on that. Well, at least I felt I did back then, and said, okay, what's another big problem that I could help to solve for the industry that didn't seem like it was getting solved at the time? And the next thing was, the financial side of things. So credit.
Yep.
Like the big hairy problem that nobody really wants to deal with. It's not the sexiest thing, especially if you're a broker. Like you don't really think a lot about your credit department or your accounting back office. And I had never wanted to think about it at all.
They're
Like that's
usually
just
shut
something that
off.
happens over there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
They're shut off in the corner. Sometimes
yeah.
out of their shell and they'll ask questions. You're like, what are you doing here? I don't want to think about
Yeah.
that. But
I did it. And then I was like, you know what? Like this is a perfect opportunity for good software
yeah.
and a product and stuff to kind of solve some of those problems that for that very reason that nobody really wants to deal with it or put a lot of time and effort into it. And that's basically what would become HaulPay. And that was about 2017 when I kind of went full time with the company that I was building and started to build what would now become HaulPay later on.
That's crazy. So have you always kind of had that? I mean, I guess you've always had the entrepreneur spirit in you. So
Definitely the builder thing for sure, right? Because the
yeah.
car stuff, I think that's a big part of it.
Was it scary for you to kind of step out on your own, or kind of were you feel like you kind of had a backing, or do you have, I guess like for me, the scariest part, if I had an innovative idea, which, I don't really always have those, but if I had an innovative idea, I knew I could do it. Just like officially taking the leap. Like, I think I like the security of things. So
Sure. It
has
was
that,
not easy. Yeah. I don't come from very, like, any family wealth or anything like that. Most of my family has been like fire chiefs or government, professor or teachers and stuff like that. So,
yeah,
all people want to serve, but not, not from business. So, I had to really learn this the hard way and kind of figure this out through a chain of like mentors and, advisors. And It was not easy. I literally just saved up as much money as I could. I took on a small loan. I kind of tried to time, me quitting my job as best I could with my efforts to go out and continue to grow like the revenue. So there's kind of like, I was pretty much like nights and weekends for a couple of years just to get
Wow.
to that 2017 point. Really taking it seriously to where like I could pay for like living expenses. So, 'cause it's
Yeah.
gonna take another year till I get to the next milestone, but I was able to do that. The revenue continued to grow. I raised a very small amount of money initially from some angel investors in Southern California, very modest amount. I raised a little bit more later, very modest amount compared to some of the big freight techs over the last 5 or 6 years, but enough. And the rest kind of history from there. So.
Well, I think it's interesting that you even bring up the whole angel investors with being moderate. I actually had this conversation the other day at McLeod. I'm like, I think when people post online, like we raised $1 bajillion, it's like, I'm like, that means you got to spend that money a certain way. That means you're pricing, you have to earn all that money back and pay all these people back. And that means maybe my rate as a consumer is going to go up. I don't necessarily think that that's like a great thing to advertise or to even be like. I do think you always need somebody to like kind of help you take it to the next level, but being like very, like what's the right way to say this? Kind of being like the one you're modest and pulling up your bootstraps and like you're putting in the grit. You have just a little bit of funding on the backside. I think that helps you build a better product than having to answer to all these this large amount, having like this debt crushing, you know, thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think a lot of what happened, that there was a while where, even back in 2016, 2017, when I started to go full time on this stuff, I was seeing some of the fundraisers even back then for like even Convoy early on. I'm like, this is just crazy. And there's been a few press and articles out more recently where some folks were saying like, hey, like what happened for a while was a lot of the venture capital investors, when they saw like $800 billion a year, they thought that was revenue, not gross receipts in trucking. So, which you would think like that's the biggest industry, one of the biggest industries on the planet for the whole world, just in, the US. You'd think that might trigger some deeper investigation of the numbers. But a lot of VCs were just seeing like, this is such a massive revenue opportunity when the actual revenue opportunity was more like 10 or 15% of that number, right? So I think that was a big factor in a lot of the big valuations and a lot of the funding that happened, between like almost since 2016, 2017 until 2021, right? Ish. That a lot of it had to factor into just not really completely understanding how the industry works and it's very fragmented. There's certain segments of the market kind of own that percentage of that 800 billion in gross receipts. And then after that, you trickle down to revenue. So to your point, like when some of these groups raise a ton of money, their investors were expecting these crazy revenue numbers very quickly, almost like it's just like uncharted market, like a brand new blue ocean market like social media or something. And no one's ever brought technology here ever, so there was I think a lot of like improperly sizing the market and misconceptions that led to some of the crazy fundraisers. But if you're building, some products and some services do demand more capital, like there's just no way around it. If you're going to break into a certain thing, or if you're building, like if I wanted to build an aerospace company or a defense company, like I've got to raise a lot of capital because I need like secure facilities. I need all this industrial equipment, like actual capital investment. Some of the fleet management ELD stuff early on that required a lot of investment. You see some of it with the automated trucks too. So there are cases where there's just no way around building that business without raising a lot of capital, unless you're one of the richest families in the world, you just have a ton of capital, which is very unlikely. Most entrepreneurs are not from those backgrounds.
Right. No, that's a good point. It definitely depends on the business, but I think like especially like HaulPay being one where it is like learning it, developing it kind of as you grow it. I think you're kind of just building on and on and on and on and keep building like a better use case. So how did you, since you weren't in like the accounting space of it, how did you understand fully what that need was? And were you like jumping in and learning from others, or how did you even get to the point where you knew? I mean, I guess I knew that this was always a problem, but I didn't realize how much it actually took. So how did you learn all of that?
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of it was, so some of it I got cued into when I was just thinking about, like, I think at the time I was thinking of like UShip and some of these like consumer load board platforms where I was like, hey, how do they like finalize the whole transaction through this load board to like a payment? And like, that's it, it's done. And a lot of that, I think UShip was partnered with eBay for a while. They may still be for some of like the more industrial moves. So just interesting to me, like, how could you get a transaction for freight like that? It's fully finalized, paid. There's no like, exception cases all the way through the process. So I was looking at some of those other examples and, I had known about factoring, but it wasn't something that I had dealt with much previously because again, it's still more of an accounting thing, right? At a brokerage. But the other thing that kind of resonated was I just remember C.H. Robinson was one of the first companies that did quick pay and did it very well. And that helped them have a competitive advantage for a number of years in the buy side of the market because they could just offer these cheap quick pays. T-Check was like the infrastructure they used back then for that. I think they even back then they were part of Comdata, so it's a longer story there. But that was really interesting to me. I'm like, all right, well, there's some way to like speed up cash flow, and then I started actually just investigating and by talking to our users on the little load board I'd built. Be like, hey, like what other problems are you guys as carriers experiencing when it comes to this stuff? Like the biggest things that were coming up were, we use factoring companies, but most of the ones we work with are kind of predatory. Their terms are really restrictive. If they do have bad behavior, I can't get out of this contract for a year or two, and there's a big penalty for it. So that kind of also cued me in like, there's a lack of flexibility. A lot of these smaller carriers in the future are getting locked into these things. And that was kind of what started to kind of grow this idea of how do we make a more friendlier, less predatory payment and financial platform for the industry when a lot of these folks are already going through it, trying to, especially the carriers out there, don't have the best terms on a lot of their financing.
Yeah, even
That's
like
where it kind of started.
Yeah, fuel cards too is another one where like they get locked in and it's kind of a rabbit hole and they it's almost like a quick pay loan type thing is kind of what some of those fuel cards turn into, and factoring companies. So I think you're right, where you can really get into a bad situation where you're like a buy here, pay here, and you're never paying it off, and you're like, oh my God, how do I get out of this?
Yeah. So we just figured like, all right, we kind of know at that point, I kind of knew how, the load data worked and how the booking process worked. And can we take some of that information and like de-risk our position if we're going to fund like invoices and make payments so that we can offer a better price and a better set of terms to these carriers? That was kind of the beachhead. That's how it started. And then we progressed on to doing something similar for freight brokers. And then now we're doing a lot more with payments. So, even if you don't need factoring or you only want to use financing through us for selective cases, you get all the benefits of using the software we've built over the years to kind of de-risk that transaction, but you can use your own money too.
Yeah, and I think the de-risk thing is a kind of a great segue to get to the next thing. So I had Joanne on there the other day where we were talking about fuel manipulation, and there is such like a untalked about, like you said, the accounting people are off in the corner. We don't talk to them, that type of thing. But that is such like a fraud target area. Like if you're not knowing what to look for, like that's at the end of the day, all they really want is money. So that's really where I think a lot of focus needs to be. And I think you guys do a great job at keeping like some automation, but also that manual human eye thing at it as well.
Yeah, there's a percentage that always gets out that we just, you kind of need to have a human in the loop, even with some of them we collect, especially in these special cases where we can get very nuanced and sophisticated with what some of the bad athletes are doing.
Right. And they're coming out with new stuff all the time. So if you don't have somebody kind of looking at it, it's like there's no way you're going to catch up with the newest trend until you're hit with X amount of dollars.
Yep. And you can't build software for it either unless, someone's like, hey, this is a new use case or case that we haven't seen before. Can we build software for this case yet? Should we? Is it just a one-off, or we think it's going to happen again? Stuff like that also kind of feeds into that.
Yeah, because usually once they get away with it a couple of times, they're like, you can go to town on this part of it. So yeah, I think you're right with having that the double flow of things. And I do think you guys do a really good job at that, just from my experience with and customers dealing with you guys. So, but yeah, I guess where have you guys kind of taken the turn where I think a lot of it's factoring and stuff like that, but that risk management things, like I said, I think you guys do really well at that. So what do you guys do to keep up with it? And what's your guys's, how do you guys say innovative?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is the fact that we still are kind of a composite organization. Like we still do quite a bit of carrier factoring we've moved more into small fleets than owner operators per se, but we still deal with those pressures, friction points, and continue to kind of iterate our software to supply a good experience to those type of users. But that gives us a very unique perspective for what I would openly admit we're a bit smaller than some of the top factors out there, let's say. But we have that perspective. We're hands-on. We see it every day. We have software that we're tweaking to address some of those special cases. And that feeds back over to the other side of the house, right? Which is the brokerage side of things that we really have seen the most growth and opportunity, frankly, and we're going to continue to double down on, so to speak. But, we could take things that we're learning with carrier factoring and what carriers are dealing with and what we know to be issues as a factor for carriers, and we can lay that over to a broker who's using us for payments or for financing and say, hey, this is the way that our software runs things and processes these transactions. And because we have live experience every day, this is why this will actually protect you from, let's say, downside credit risk or your credit score being affected. That's a big one that comes up with small, mid-sized brokerages. Payee fraud. We're validating carrier payment information, not just for payees that the brokers want to pay that they're bringing on the platform, but also to factoring customers that we're still servicing and bringing on for the carrier side of the business. So I think having the two sides together under one roof with one platform gives us a special insight that plays benefits to both sides, basically.
Well, and don't you guys do a little bit with like the shipping site, like a shipper sending stuff over to, like, validating kind of that they're like a legitimate entity too? Because that is like,
Thanks for pointing that out. I almost forgot about that. Yeah. So if you're a broker and let's say you have a TMS or you're just doing your thing, getting shippers on board, getting credit applications or whatever submitted. If you submit a new shipper that isn't already in our system, although that's getting fewer and far between as we grow, we do our own verification process on the shippers too. So that means we're verifying the accounts payable person contact, general contact, their address, phone number, but we do it independently, right? So if you get, let's say, fraudulent shipper information, which we've seen a number of scams over the last couple of years, specifically using that as the other side of the transaction, right? That's not something that you need to worry about. We want to protect ourselves. And it's one of the things, a lot of the stuff that we've developed, going back to the history, starting with some carrier factor and then moving into brokerages, is that we wanted to protect ourselves from a lot of this fraud. And we've developed systems and software internally that now are extending out as features for our customers, right? So that's a great example, and thanks for reminding me about that. But you want to know that your carrier is who they say they are, and their bank account is actually owned by them, and it's the real carrier, the real payee. It's one of the owners of the business that has that bank account. And the other side, you want to make sure that who you're billing is actually legitimately, independently verified as the shipper, and that's something that we do. It's not an extra charge. It's not an extra, service of any kind. It's just baked into the product, and that's something we're very proud of.
no, it's I don't know of anybody else really doing that, because I think the shipper fraud part, where you have the fake shipper coming in, giving you a fake load, you're posting that load, they're a fake carrier picking up the load, giving you a fake, like, it's like this whole huge thing. And it's funny because on the fraud girl side of my stuff, it's like, if you're getting that contact us form as a broker and you're getting, unless if you're CH Robinson or something, you're not getting real shippers reaching out to you saying, hey, I know you're a small broker. I think you'd be the one to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, it's so rare that you would ever have that happen. So rare.
Yeah, it's not maybe 10 years ago when I was doing the load board, I get like, wow, someone wants to try this out. But now it's like everyone's got a landing page, everyone's got a web form. Yeah, you get your hopes up. I've been there. I've been when I was more small business, like you get excited, but Yeah. Can you depend on a service or a platform to vet that stuff for you, especially when you're starting out or even when you're starting to scale and you're trying to keep your expenses low? So we do a great job of that. And again, it's something that doesn't come at any additional cost.
Yeah.
You're able to finance the business selectively, use the payments side of the platform to protect yourself and automate that process. It just saves a ton of time for the business and cost. And then wrapped up all inside of that is this fraud mitigation stuff that's just a huge value add.
Yeah, it's definitely a huge value. And I think that's kind of that extra layer of protection where maybe I have a good vetting process and things like that in place, which I think is great, but having additional eyes on it outside of your company, because like I said, you guys are dealing with a lot bigger volume than my little brokerage would, or any size brokerage. Even if you did do a major brokerage or whatever as a customer, you're still seeing more than just their little market. You know what I mean? Um, So I guess with that all kind of being said, how do you think if I'm a mid-sized broker or even like starting out, like how taking that finance pressure off of me and putting that on there, do you feel like that's highly recommended, or is there like a certain level of your business that you should start looking at it, or right off the bat? Like how do you recommend as far as like a whatever level broker needs some like a service like yourself?
Yeah. So, well, I mean, I think you kind of said it, which is just there's not a lot out there that does this, especially in one place.
Okay.
So, we have brokerages that we're careful with brand new startup brokerages unless the team has previous brokerage experience, because we have had past history of folks that it's kind of like a weekend project. They're not really putting a lot of effort, and they just kind of we don't have
Yeah.
a minimum subscription, so we're not going to like charge you to have access to the platform, but that can load up our team with requests that might not be from a group that's going to make it the next month or so. So we do have some qualifiers around the experience level of the team if it's a brand new brokerage, but we will work with brand new brokerages if that experience level makes sense.
Okay.
But all the way up from there to 3 to 5 years in business, 50 to 100 million in total gross receipts for the year, right? So that's probably an average of 10 million in receipts per month. And probably some of the largest ones we have, right? So it's definitely mid-market, but kind of we're starting to see more upper mid-market now. And we have groups that have grown with us, right? From that size, even 5 years ago. We're really proud of that a lot of our customers have been with us since, 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago and have grown to really significant levels. And, they may have shopped around a little bit, but it's just hard to beat the value, I think, once you get to using the system after a while. So
Yeah.
we've got a pretty wide range, but it really is like people have the potential to get to the mid-market, and the mid-market, and we're starting to get some more of the larger folks that just want to use the payments now.
That's cool. Well, and I think you're right with what like you start off somewhere and then you grow from there. So MCPs like that too. Like I've had customers that they like, and some of them you're like, I talk to these guys and you're like, look, you're probably not going to make it after a year. Like you don't know anything about this business. You have not done your homework. You just saw like a YouTube video and you can see how much money you can make. But there is some where you kind of need to know a little bit, like start off somewhere as like a mid-level, almost like a apprenticeship, right? Like I think that's in
Yeah.
order to be a successful broker, I think you need that apprenticeship part. Just like even like drivers, they have that training program most of the time with companies where if you're a brand new driver, you're
Yep.
under somebody for a while. I think
Yeah.
that's something that if you're starting a new brokerage, you have to have in order to be successful. And then on top of that, grow as you grow and staying with a company like, hey, this HaulPay, kept me. I started here and they kept me from making these bad mistakes along the way, or maybe I would have gotten stuck here and being able to grow. So
Well, if you
that's
think,
cool.
if you think about it, there's a lot to kind of put together if you didn't work with HaulPay, right? You have to put together some kind of accounting back office. You have to make sure that you're always invoicing on time. You have to make sure you're paying the carrier's factors on time, otherwise that will destroy your fledgling credit rating in some cases.
Yeah.
We've had brokerages come to us that have been around for 3 to 5 years, sometimes longer, and they just needed credit repair because their back office kind of sagged and they weren't paying, carriers and their factors as quickly as maybe they could be. In some of those cases, they didn't even use the factoring. They just needed something to automate the payables on time. And so they just didn't have to worry about it. And the value added benefit of not having to worry about paying a fake carrier was just like a no-brainer, right? So I
Yeah.
think that's the big takeaway. It's super flexible from anywhere those more qualified upstarts to mid-market, and we're starting to see some upwards movement beyond that too.
And that's kind of the difference between like winging it, you know what I mean? Like just throwing a team together and hoping that they take up everything and you stay up to date with those guys in the corner. Um, Other than taking your credit serious. And that's almost like your daily life too. Like if you're not staying on top of all your bills or keeping things on auto pay or doing this, like you could definitely hurt your own individual credit. It's almost the same type of philosophy.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I mean, there's no upfront cost, right? So it's really just how many transactions do you do? It's a very, very low cost program. I think our effective rate for most brokers, even on the financing factor side, is definitely lower than bank rates that you can get until you get to a much larger scale of brokerages. So yeah, we're pretty proud of what we're able to do here. And again, most of us come from, I mean, most of the team too has experience at small, mid-sized brokerages too.
Really?
So
Okay.
like the exception of the software engineers, which is a little tougher to find software engineers who are big brokers, but
Yeah.
but yeah, like I'd say about a third of our team at least has been at a smaller mid-sized brokerage at least for a year or 2 years. So they have some appreciation for that.
Right. I think that makes a big difference. It's a different type of industry than anything else out there. Almost like if you're a medical stuff, like you need to have some sort of experience in that. I think logistics is the same way. So is there any other, since whenever you're a mid-level, and I'm sure you probably are like, oh, well, if HaulPay didn't work out, then I would have created this next level of workflow. Is there anything else that whenever you're a broker, you're like, oh, this would have been cool? And they probably have tech out for it now because it seems like they're tech now. Like, I've been on the tech side for 2 years, and just the past 2 years, I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't really even realize that was a problem, and now it's solved. Do you have any other workflows that
Yeah,
would be
yeah, for sure. If I go back in time a little bit, I definitely think like I was starting to work towards like the book it now functionality and that type of stuff. And I mean, like some of the stuff that you're seeing on like the visibility, like verifying the actual ELD tracking with actual like camera sensors and stuff on the highways, that stuff's pretty interesting to me. Yeah, I mean, I think generally speaking, there's been a lot of efforts to find out any possible place where you could kind of put software into things over the last, especially the freight tech boom period. And I think it just comes down to building tools for the broker or the operator themselves, where I think for a while, it was like this big kind of push to build this platform that kind of forces everyone to use that process. It's like, that's the thing about this industry, right? That's one thing I love about it is it is fragmented and there's so many different ways and a lot of it's still very relationship based. And those relationships and that type of freight has special requirements. So that's one of the positives, but also challenges. So I think that anything dealing with the broker themselves or the operator, if it's carrier, ways to make their life more efficient or less stressful is still one of the more obvious places to dial into. And we're happy to do that on the fraud and the finance side, but there's still a lot to be done on workflows and back office stuff that's unrelated to finance too.
Yeah, I think the back office stuff, especially, I think just putting that into the workflow, like kind of like you just said, like everybody has different things and different customers require different things. And it's like all over the place. So having something that's a little bit more automated, which I think that we came a long ways on really everything, but having like integrated partners and integrated solutions to fix those pain points, we came a long way. So I'm pretty proud of us.
Yeah.
Here.
I mean, well, and that's some of these like cross-platform integrations are really kind of helping to tie out the gaps too.
Yeah.
Right. So that's a prime example of because there's just so much you can do. Some of these problems there's just so many different scenarios where they can crop up and different edge cases and stuff like that. And you can't build for all of them, but you're seeing more like, hey, our team ended up specializing in this in freight tech, and our company does more of this, and we have this background. Patching those things together for the end customer ends up kind of giving them the best experience.
Yeah, totally. And there's like I actually was just on another phone call talking about tech debt, if I can talk. And that's a real thing too. Like you jumping in too far in, and kind of like you working on like a smaller level, and then you're growing with the people. And same kind of thing with what I do too. Like you're able to start here and then keep going. I think that's something else that isn't talked about enough is the whole tech debt, and how even just that tech debt can really hurt your debt if you're not doing, like it all circles back around. So there's
Yeah,
automation,
sure.
right? And then
Yeah, no, for sure. It's trying to figure out how to implement or on I say like, uninstall or deconstruct something that had good intentions, maybe put together 3 or 4 or 5 years ago as a process, but now it's actually creating more bottlenecks, and you have to kind of rethink that and rework it is definitely probably even a challenge for some groups that were kind of early to the freight tech stuff, right? So there's always an opportunity to rethink it. And if you have a good plan and you're methodical and just taking it step by step, any of those projects are possible. You just have to have a little bit of patience.
Well, and even that, I'm sure you implement that within your own organization where maybe, like, obviously, big difference between 2017 and now. So you've had to
Yeah.
make some adjustments and make some changes. But so what changes, I guess, have you guys made, especially when it comes to, I guess fraud will probably be the biggest thing that you guys changed. But what would you say has been the biggest changes that you made throughout the years that made a big impact in not having that bottleneck just within your own organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is having more of a priority around those, of actually having that as a culture of the team and the company around, hey, like, where are you guys feeling like you're bottlenecked, or where are the areas where there's like a repetitive process that's just happening over and over and over again? Like, can we queue in? Can we clearly identify those and validate that is an area that is just going to start to spiral out of control, basically? So like when you see those kind of like sparks where those things are happening, the way I like to think about it is like, all right, well, if I did this 10x, right, where this is now, like, would this just eat everyone's time? And that kind of helps you decide where to prioritize your efforts, right? And that could be a process or a piece of a feature for a software for a customer. Like, hey, we have a couple things like this right now. We're making updates to. I mean, everybody in software always does, but like a prime example is like, oh, well, the customer keeps interacting with this feature in this way, and that requires them to email support. And now we're getting, well, we have all these emails from support because this one particular feature isn't intuitive. Like, but you realize if you just kind of resolve that and put some extra focus on it, then you could drop the percentage of your inbound support requests. So it's like kind of all cascades downstream. So looking for what is like the highest ROI, if you will, leverage point every time you kind of see these things crop up, kind of keeps you honest as to where you really need to be putting your time and your resources to get the best return on, especially limited time, especially for mid-market brokerages. I think that's a big thing to think about.
So we haven't talked about AI yet. So with AI, and kind of having those same talking points with the bottlenecking and stuff like that, have you guys incorporated that, even just like throwing in ChatGPT in your responses, or like what have you guys incorporated any type of AI within your business?
Yeah, so we have implemented AI in a wide range of ways. So we've implemented it from kind of helping to auto draft responses to support inquiries, right? It's pretty much, I guess the way I would cover this is almost all the ways we've incorporated over the last year have been what you call human in the loop. So it's more about making the team members that we have more efficient or more effective, making simple or repetitive tasks less of a pain in the butt, basically. But we've also done stuff like, our software developers, they have co-pilots and coding agents that can help them develop and write tests and kind of work on things faster. We're starting to implement some things with underwriting now, and credit checking processes. A percentage of our credit checks always get kicked out for manual review because they're at a threshold where our formula or algorithm for automatically approving certain credit limits for the factoring side, let's say, it's just right at the threshold and it needs a manual review. So we're working on like an agent that's going to automate that process, right? So there's a lot of opportunity, but as far as from our position, and might be helpful to others who are examining some of these platforms and technologies, especially if it's a critical process, we always have a human in the loop still. As we get more comfortable with like I was mentioning just a few minutes ago, like super repetitive processes, and like we know like the data being returned and the connectivity to like maybe the database we're using to get certain answers for those responses is solid, then we might start walking back the amount of human in the loop that's going on and just keep it to like very specific cases that we know are like the most sensitive. But my only suggestion is for anyone who's starting to roll this stuff out is just do it do it. You don't need to do it all, give up all of your access and control to one of these, agents or systems on day one. Recommend keeping a human in the loop as much as possible until you're really comfortable with those things, and focus on the most repetitive, mind-numbing things first. But yeah, even just drafting email responses or doing outreach, you can automate a lot of that content pretty quickly, and it's big time saver.
That's awesome. No, I think you're right. I mean, you don't want the Terminator happening, right? Like you don't want to throw everything at it, and it's like now the Terminator's coming after you and whatever.
Well, and sometimes you have to unwind what the heck happened. So now you're like, wait, what did our bot do this? And like, did it like, there's also like with support bots and stuff like that, you got to be a little careful because sometimes the hallucinations is a problem with LLMs or large language models. So you want to be mindful of like being careful with whatever, if you're automating support, right? Ask that vendor, how do you guys deal with hallucinations? How can you make sure that information from one customer won't get shared with another customer? Because I've even seen some of that happen when it's just like throw everything at an AI bot and let it figure it out, So there's ways to tune those systems where you don't have to have some really difficult conversation with a customer because their information somehow got shared to a carrier and they didn't want it shared or something.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I never even thought about that, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's why, like at my company, we're all paid for a subscription, and all of our stuff has to stay secure. You know what I mean? Within our
on the paid accounts, for sure. Yeah, that's the way to do it. You definitely want a paid account. Make sure you're not. The models aren't training on any sensitive data. There's little settings in there you want to set up, but yeah, always ask the question if you're talking to vendors. I would say too about automating things like, hey, how do you make sure that information from one account doesn't bleed over to another? I think that if that's one takeaway I give everyone on if you guys are starting to implement some of this stuff, is a top question.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. I love that. All right, what else is anything new you want to talk about? Any shows you guys are going to, like anything that's the best and greatest things with HaulPay?
Yeah, not too much going on for the rest of the year right now. I will definitely get Manifest next year. So if anybody's going, I'll publish more on my social, so it's easy to meet up with me when I'm there. It's usually great. I just went for the first time this last year, but it was a great opportunity to meet customers of ours that were there. There's just a lot of our customers that were there more than some of the other conferences because they just want to know what's going on. It's kind of become a who's who there. So I'll publish around my social for anyone who wants to link that. I love meeting customers, even prospective customers in person. That's how I learned too. And our team learns a lot. I was just meeting with folks. So, but not too much else going on. We have some big updates coming on the payment side that I think will help give faster payment deliveries for carriers for our broker customers. More to come on that. I don't want to say too much more now, but some exciting updates by the end of the year will be coming on that front that I think will add even more value to the platform.
That's so cool. I love it. Well, I love you guys are doing, like I had you guys on the fraud stuff because I think you guys really do take that into a realistic way that it can't be fully automated. I think a lot of people make that mistake. I think you can automate some of the old stuff that were like old trends back then, but now, they're coming out with new things all the time and they're tweaking those just a little bit so those automations aren't catching it.
That's the even in the loop thing, right? You can use it to augment, but you kind of need someone there to catch the cases stuff for sure.
Yeah, because you never know. So I love what you guys are doing on that front. As coming from the fraud girl or whatever they call me now. But yeah, anyways, well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. And of course, they can go to haulpay.com. And is that your guys' website, haulpay.com?
Yeah, so HaulPay, it's haulpay.io is the yeah. And if you Google HaulPay, we should come right up and check it out. We'll get you on a demo. We'll show you what we can do, and hopefully we can help you guys out.
Awesome, love it, Steve. Well, thanks for coming on. Bye, everybody.
Tell Everything.
Tell me everything.